Good afternoon and welcome to the November 16, 2016 Legal and Finance Committee meeting. We'll start off with roll call and determination of quorum. Here. Now for the adoption of agenda.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion to approve. All in favor? Now on to general public comment. We don't have any speaker requests. I don't see anybody in the audience jumping up and down. So I will open and close that. Now on to the consent items, item 1 through 12. I will open public comment. None there. I will close that. Does anybody on the dais have anything they want to remove? Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to have item number 3, number 8, and number 12 removed, please.
Alderman Lorente.
Thank you, Chair. Items 6 and 9, please.
We might as well have just done them all. If I can have a motion to adopt the remainder.
So moved. Second.
We have an adoption to approve 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 10, and 11. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Item 3 from the Police Department, approved 2017 budget supplement report. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to approve this, but identify the funding source as the $50,000 from contingency fund, and the remaining to be used or supplemented out of their 2017 existing budget. If I can get a second?
Second.
Thank you. The reason for this is that this is actually going into next year's, the 2017. This was a program by the police department to get a matching grant fund or a fund to increase our police force. And we approved it at the time, and that was great. But since we just approved the 2017 budget and we didn't take any reductions out of that 2017 budget, I believe from the information that I had reviewing the last 3 years on their wage lines, I believe that they can make up the supplemental. It's roughly less than $25,000, especially if the council gives up their contingency of $50,000. That's the reason I'm using those funding sources. Thank you.
And we have no one else to speak. Alderwoman Modrick.
Thank you. While we have Chief Hedrick here, I'd like to just see if there's an opportunity to respond to Amanda's statement on this agenda item for budget supplement.
So the thing I would add is that like you said, our budget for 2017 is already submitted, and we weren't able to include this in for 2017 because part of the grant is that you have to have funding. You can't have funding set aside for this for items. We have to prove that we're using this funding for officers that would be doing above and beyond our normal services. So if we had the money set aside in our 2017 budget for this, it would have hindered our chances to obtain the grant through fear of supplanting. So, I can tell you last year we didn't have additional funding left over. It was the day before New Year's. I was on the phone with Tracy for a good 2 hours where we were trying to figure out where we were going to have our additional funding come from. And, I did get the item that Pauline sent Alderwoman Scott, and it did show that we don't have additional funding left over on an annual basis. So I guess I'd want to make that aware that these are for funds that are above and beyond what we had scheduled for 2017.
I'd like to make a motion. Buzz it back in? Do I have to go a circle? Okay. Come out and back in? I'll go out, and then I'll come back.
Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the reason I was saying this is, Officer Hendrick has already said that he saw the same information that I received. Over the last 3 years, they came in under their wage line, but their overtime line came in exceptionally heavy. So, and then even the budget amount for their overtime, they never even corrected that. So it looks like they've got some flexibility within their budget to make up those funds. And as we stated during our budget hearings, if they end up going through and their programs require them to have exceptional overtime like they've had over the last 3 years, I think they can come back before the council and we'll take a look at finishing out and make sure that we've got our police force that can actually serve and protect our citizens within the city. So at this time, I pulled number 8, and not to talk out of turn, but the reason I pulled number 8 is that I have a question for Tracy. When we get to it, I'll address it at that time. But it already shows that we are low in our cash fund, lower this year than we have been in the last 5 years. And so the 2017 budget is already using $3.5 million of undesignated cash to balance it. I would hate to start in 2016 chipping away at adding additional undesignated cash to the budget until we can see that the need is there. I just see that we've got more time. So that's the reason I was offering it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Scott. And Alderwoman Modrick, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Chair. Then I just want to ask, because we have an obligation as a city to also come in with a match, and is that going to put this funding opportunity in jeopardy if we don't show it? And I should probably ask Chief. Thank you.
So both of these grants have been awarded to us, and I can tell you that we've been using the COPS grant for, off and on for at least 10 years, where we've found ways to find funding for additional resources for our department. Over the last couple years, we haven't been able to make it happen. We weren't awarded funding through the COPS grant over the last couple years, and so this year when it happened, we were excited because we put in a lot of work and effort to try and make this go. And the federal share for the COPS grant is over $375,000. So it's a big award. And if you look at the state highway safety grant, they're shelling out $130,000 and plus of that also. So a couple big awards. And just as we had lined out, we have to be able to show that we're going to be using these resources for additional items or additional things that we aren't currently doing. And so knowing all of that, we weren't able to incorporate that into the 2017 budget until we knew what was happening with these grants. So they've been awarded. We have the ability to do this. I guess that if we're talking further about the 72 that needs to come from the local match, it seems like I'm not the budget person for the council, but when we're obtaining over $400,000 in funding, the 72 seems like a smaller amount that we could. I'm hoping we can make this happen and not have a monkey wrench thrown in it.
When Councilwoman Scott had mentioned that there was heavy overtime, with the adjustment of that based on the budget 2017 and the work to get more officers employed, is that happening, and is that going to help reduce the overtime so we don't have the overtime in the budget of 2017 like we did in the previous years?
That's the goal. I can tell you over the last 2 years, crime has went up in our city substantially, and not only crime in general, but violent crime has increased. And we're talking about the big things like robberies. Last year was a record number of homicides in our city. Last year was a record number of aggravated assaults. And so theoretically, yes, if we were to get more help, it should cut down on the overtime. But when you're seeing increased calls for service increased violent crime, the potential is for it to either stay the same, but we're hoping additional officers can help bring that number down.
It seems to me, as we're looking at these numbers, that this is just a reinvestment into the public safety of our community, which is alerted right now at the crisis that we're in. And it seems like good money going after the right cause. And I think I've got my questions answered for the moment. I'll go out and back in.
Thank you. Alderman Wright, you have the floor.
I'll support the amendment for supplemental funding, but one thing that I would caution the council about is if we apply for these grants in good faith, we need to stand behind the obligation to match them, in my opinion. And secondly, if we accept it, we're obligated to pay it no matter what, so we might as well be up front and put the money there. If we don't need it, we got it. Okay? So I'm going to support the supplement.
Alderwoman Modrick, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make that motion of approving 2017 budget supplement report. And then if I get a second, I'd like to retain the floor for maybe one more round.
Second.
You have to do a substitute.
On top of it, I change that to a substitute motion. Second it.
Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm not sure this will be helpful at this point, but to go back to Alderwoman Scott's question about can we put this off and fund it later, I think technically the answer is yes, because we're going to be required through the grant process to show that we've hired the employees and that their wage is such and we're receiving 25% less. And so at the end of the year, I think we could balance those books. But as far as the PD budget goes, I've spent a lot of time with the department budget, and we are taking additional FTEs out of the existing budget. And so I'm calculating, I'm not a betting person, but I'm calculating that we're going to come in within triple digits of zero at the end of that year. So I think we're going to be very thin on excess cash in the wages and benefits column in the police department at the end of 17, just so you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you want the floor again?
I do, Chair.
You may have the floor one more time, Alderwoman Modrick.
I better use my time wisely if this is the last round. So the point was made, if these departments are reaching out for grants, but we're not placing funds in a way to support the grants when we have these huge awards, whether it's fire or police or any of the other awards that we receive, then perhaps, and maybe this is already in place, a communication of those grants going out there with the funding amounts and what our portion or our match would be, could be in a side column, so we know how many are going out and how many we may have to support in our budget. Because you hate to turn down $1 million budget or a $300,000 budget or any number that where it really, we're getting the money in that's far exceeding what we're having to put in, and that just is a great thing if we've got that columnized or we know that we've got that in someplace where we can pull that through instead of denying a nice budget that comes in no matter what the dollar amount. So if that's something I can just suggest, because it is an item that many of our departments are doing, maybe that's a way to communicate from within legal and finance so we know where we're at, and it might even help the budget process in the future, just so we're aware, because when they do come, by the time they hit the dais, by the time they hit here, you just don't want to leave any money on the table. You want to take it and put it in the bank and then put it to use. And I'll leave with that.
Thank you, Alderwoman Modrick. Alderman Wright, you have the floor.
A question either to finance or the attorney, but I believe that anytime there's a grant application by staff, they're formally filled out and approved by council, which includes our obligation. Is that not true? So this item, along with other things that we get, whether they're fire or solid waste match grants or whatever, we see them way before they actually apply. And that takes the approval there. I think we're kind of shortchanging ourselves by not saying that we're backing up on deals that we've already made. So I still support the supplement. Just a technicality. Am I correct, though? We may say yes instead of not. This is, thank you. So it's on the record, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Wright. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor again.
Thank you. May I ask the finance officer or the person, Tracy, representing the finance office here today, a question, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Tracy, in no way did my original motion say that we weren't matching the funds. I was just identifying funding sources. Am I missing something in my motion? Did I say that we wouldn't match the funds and take the grant?
No, that's not what I interpreted in your
Okay,
motion.
thank you, because that's not what I had intended. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind up here. What I was just simply doing was identifying the funding sources at this time and making a motion to approve and accept the COPS grant and the state grant. But I was identifying the funding source as the $50,000 that's currently allocated for city council contingency. So that is already in the budget, and it will be moved over to the police wage line item to supplement this, which only leaves less than $23,000 to be absorbed by the current police department budget. And again, they have a whole year to come back that if for some reason they have excessive overtime again and they can't balance their budget, they can always come back to city council and make up that $23,000. I can't believe we're arguing over $23,000 when the purpose and the intention of this was to accept the grant to start with. So thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Alderwoman Scott. Alderman Wright, you have the floor.
Well, I might say that apparently my ears don't work very well, because if I didn't hear it directly, I understood it to be that we'll wait and see if we have a supplement, because I think we'll have a supplement. That's not the same as saying we're funding it. I'm sorry. So I'm just saying we need to be straight up, and we're going to stand behind it. We're going to fund it, period. And if we don't have the money, we do. So that's all I want to say. I took it from your discussion that you're looking for money from other places other than definitely saying we're going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else that wants to speak on this item. So we have a motion on the floor. All in favor, say. We have a substitute motion on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nope.
And I will have to break the tie, so I will say no, and we'll go to the first motion that was made. All in favor of the first motion?
Aye. Chair. Can I?
Would you state the first motion?
I don't even think I got the first motion because my microphone was very hard for me.
The motion maker will state it.
Hello. Is it on now? Okay. So the motion is to accept the grant but identify the funding sources as transferring the $50,000 from city council contingency and then make up the remaining or accept the remaining of it in the existing 2017 police budget. Thank you.
Now we have the motion on the floor. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Item number 6, acknowledge September 2016 sales tax report. Mr. Laurenti, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pull this one. Funny how this kind of segues to some of the conversation we've had, but it's important for the public to know, and obviously my colleagues, I hope they're aware that through this year so far in 2016, we're looking at just 1.46% increase over the previous year in sales tax. Now the budget, 17 budget, is based on a 2% projection, but so we're more than 0.5% underneath that. Now we all know we're going to get some lift here in the next couple of months in November and December. Whether that covers our projection for the 17 budget or not is another question, and I'm hoping it will, and most likely it will, but it's getting very close. I just wanted to bring this up because it's important for us to understand that it's our responsibility to look at the budget like this last agenda item was, like every family in Rapid City has to, if they have obligations that exceed their revenues or income, they have to make hard choices, and so does this council. And I just want to make sure our council understands that we need to be prepared, if necessary, to make the necessary cuts so that we live within our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Lorente. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to acknowledge.
Are you through?
I'm done. Thank you.
I don't see anyone else who wants to speak on this item. We have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Item 8, acknowledge October 2016 General Fund Cash Balance Report. And Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to acknowledge and retain the floor, if I can get a second. Thank you. May I ask Tracy a question, please? Thank you.
You may.
Thank you. Tracy, you know, when you pull this up, it's showing a $3.5 million deficit. My question to you is, I believe this report, since it's ending in October, does not include our property tax payment from the county. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And how much estimated, even if it was last year's figure, what is that to come in? Is it roughly about $8 million?
Yes, roughly 8.
Sorry. And I'm not loud enough to be heard over this at this time. Usually I am, so sorry about that. Okay, so to start again, the question, I don't know where my microphone went out or if it was never on. I started with a question to Tracy, and we have roughly about $8 million still coming in from our property tax collection from the county. That should come in November. Oh, is that not working? Do I have to start over again? Okay, so the question I asked Tracy was, we have not received our roughly $8 million from property taxes that were collected. That will be coming to the city roughly in the month of November. And so this current ending balance that's showing our cash reserve is a little concerning because it shows us in the negative. So I want to be quite frank with our taxpayers. There is an additional $8 million that is still coming in. The Chief Financial Officer, Pauline Sumption, had indicated to, when asked about this, had indicated that the 3.5 that is currently in the designated column, the city finance office right now really doesn't have a way to track that. That's usually the designated amount that is carried over from the previous budget, and it kind of sits there all year. If you look at, you go back and pull this report up every month, that amount is the same, because they never really know when those funds are actually expended or not. So though those funds were expended, we're basically sitting at zero, and that's okay, because we still have that $8 million coming in. My concern is, before my microphone went out or never was on, is that this is lower. Since I've been on the council, this is like the lowest point in October that I have seen, and my concern is, much like I pointed out earlier when we were talking about another item, the 2017 budget already is balanced by using $3.5 million roughly out of undesignated cash. So even if this undesignated cash that's on this report was already spent and we're at zero, no, we're still really $3.5 million in the hole because we still have to balance the 2017 budget. So just to be quite frank, we do have $8 million coming back in. The other thing, and I had started to say that the mayor and I have talked about this, and I've let him know, our reserve line on this report is 15% of our total budget. As our budget grows every single year, this reserve line grows every single year. And I do believe that this really needs a good look at as well, because I'm not so sure what that amount in our reserve really needs to be. And if it keeps escalating, that's just taking away working cash that we can use for anything that comes up that the city council does need to fund, such as a supplemental appropriation for anything that comes up from our city department directors. So I think as we get that business analyst and as we start getting priority-based budgeting and looking at programs in place, I think we need to review some of this as well. So thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Thank you, Alderwoman Scott. We have no one else to speak. We do have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Item 9, approve resolution number 2016-079, creation of budget analyst position. And Mr. Laurenti, you have the floor.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
And thank you, Chair. I just wanted to speak on this item as it was one of the ones that I made a motion at our last Legal and Finance meeting to continue. I was glad to see the mayor provided some more good information for the public to see that as well. And indeed, we did have a conversation at budget time. However, this is where the rubber meets the road. We're creating the position, and there's an estimate of the range of the salary for this position, and the public's going to see that. So the public needs to see all the information as specific as we can provide it to them. And so I'm just glad to see it out there, and the public can see exactly what this position is going to do for the city and our budget. And I am hoping that there will be a cost benefit, I think that's all I have to say about that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Laurenti, and I agree with you wholly. We have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Item 12, authorize mayor and finance officer to sign contract for construction of public improvements through private developer tax increment district number 78 between Yasmin Dream LLC and the city of Rapid City. And Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor. And my mic.
Thank you. If I may I ask Tracy just one question, please?
You may.
Thank you. Tracy, the last thing I remember, I think this is all set to go, but I believe the Chief Financial Officer, Pauline, had a slight concern. Was that cleared up?
I don't believe that it has been. As of yesterday, it was not.
Okay,
She's looking for interest rate information?
So is it the recommendation to hold this or send it to council without recommendation and see if we can get the...
I believe the attorney's office changed some wording. I don't know.
Oh,
if
may
that's
I
correct
ask?
or not? Carla may have some more information on that.
Thank you, Tracy. Chair, may I?
Yes, you may.
May I direct the question to Carla? Carla, can you shed some light on this? Is this item ready to go for consideration of council, or should it be?
I believe so. I haven't changed any wording related to the interest for some time. So it says that the information shall be provided related to the financing terms shall be provided to the finance officer, similar to what you've seen in other TIF agreements. I think Pauline is still waiting on that from the applicant, but I didn't change anything in the agreement related to it. I think that's something that needs to be provided separate from the agreement.
Is it possible that this information will be provided before Monday night so that we can send this to council for consideration? Oh, Mr. Hanny, or Mr. Shaffey, I should say, Hanny Shaffey.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Mr. Shaffey.
hello.
Can you shed some light on this? Last I knew, I thought this item was ready to go, but our finance officer said she was waiting for a piece of information in order to give a recommendation or satisfy the recommendation. Do you have any information you can provide the committee?
You bet. The interest rate has not been finalized yet because we're negotiating with a couple of banks. And I want actually the finance officer or a city representative to be there once those negotiations come to close to a close. That way they'll be aware of what we're negotiating. And so therefore we have not finished that. I was actually expecting to give that interest rate at the time we do, because there is another step to this process, which is the assignment of a developer agreement to the bank. And at that time I thought we will provide the interest rate, or at that time we'll receive the interest rate and give it to you. But if you wish to continue it until the finance officer has a chance to meet with us and meet with the bankers, or be party to that negotiations, that would be fine with us too.
That won't hold you up or anything on this project?
No, ma'am. No.
All right. Well, with the applicant's support of continuing this in committee for 2 weeks, or do you need longer?
2 weeks. It's actually sooner than 2 weeks, but that's not going to be before the city council, so it's not unfair. It's not fair to ask you to approve it if you wish to have that before the city council.
So I would support any of my peers to make the motion to hold in committee for 2 weeks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Laurent. Oh. Okay. Everybody went out, so we have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Aye. 2 weeks. Yes, postpone 2 weeks. Next legal and finance, yes. And anyway, motion passes. Thank you. That's the end of the consent items. We're on to non-consent items now. I will open public comment. I don't have any here. I don't see anybody jumping up and down, so I will close it. And we will go to item 13. And this is an alderwoman item from Lisa Moderick, discussion on solid waste rate increase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was brought before Public Works Committee, oh gosh, it's probably been about 6 weeks ago now, by a constituent who had gotten caught in the net of a rate increase from one day to the next. And in following up with the constituent, and it happened to be a resident that was in my ward, there was some conversation on that, and I wanted to have an understanding of where those shingle rates had come into the plan from going from $16 to $59. So in my research, I had the opportunity of meeting with Carl as well as Jerry, and we discussed the options that when these processes are going through, and we're going through such a long laundry list of rates and charge changes, this one really probably needed to be more defined, and we concurred on that. So I would like to give Carl the opportunity, if I could, to speak on the increase that we had on the shingles, and that way it will go out to the public.
Thank you, Alderwoman Moderick. And Carl, you have the floor.
Thank you, Carl Murbach, Superintendent of the Solid Waste Division. We have been working on these rates for a long time. I did include in the council agenda just kind of a history and a time there. The one concern is with the shingles, since that if you look just at the rate of going $16 per ton up to $59, that looks like a huge, huge increase. There is a history with shingles. We are still working to try and get folks coming in to recycle those. There are other resources in the Rapid City. Folks can take shingles, but there is also a history there at the landfill where in order to receive that $16 rate, it had to be just shingles and tar paper. Everything else, all the paper, all the wood material from the roof, had to be separated from that load, or it was charged that $59 rate. It's still a construction debris, any kind of construction debris, wood, everything else. It has been up at that $59 rate. After discussions with staff, with everything else, it was just easier for us to bring that up to that rate equal to other construction debris, knowing that contractors, knowing that homeowners and that still do have an option outside of the city to bring shingles at a lower rate that we do have at the landfill.
Mr. Laurenti, you have the floor.
Thank you. And can you, just for the record, do you know the other resources that the public can use, just so for those who might listen or are listening now?
Right. And thank you. Yes, the other resources are Hills material. They do that. We had, again, what they are doing with shingles is they are grinding those up. They are after the asphalt that was in there. Back when gas prices were up at a significant level, much, much higher, they were worth that much more because of the oil prices in the asphalt, in the shingles, but they still are accepting those there. They are limited on the numbers that they can take there for that. The other is we do have 2 restricted use sites here in the Rapid City area, what are just known as rubble sites or construction and demolition debris, that they do not charge by the ton, they do charge by the cubic yard. So it would be much, much cheaper for them as long as they meet the requirements for there. So again, part of that rate was to also encourage people to go outside and recycle if they could.
All right, thank you very much.
Alderman Wright, you have the floor.
Just to support what Carl is saying is, yes, the $16 a ton was set up probably 10 plus years ago, mainly to encourage separate deposits so we could get them to host material at that time. So thank you.
Alderwoman Modrick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair.
It looks like we have no one else to speak, so we have a motion on the floor to acknowledge. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Item 14 from myself, a discussion on new hazardous tree removal program. And it looks like nobody wants to speak about it. Mr. Lorente, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And if I can, it looks like he's ready to speak about that. If you could break that down for us, Mr. Beegler, on because I believe we had a discussion at council level about this, and we sent it to staff, and I believe we were looking for something to come back to us, but it's my understanding that we are doing something besides coming back to staff. If you can just elaborate a little bit about that, knowing the history of that.
Certainly. Thank you very much. Jeff Bigler, Parks and Recreation Director. This actually, is this working or no? How about this one? Is that better?
It is better.
Okay. We brought a proposal for a program to City Council a couple of times back in, I think, maybe June and July, or maybe May and June. It was a program that was going to provide some cost sharing with homeowners for removal of dead and diseased trees on private property, as well as removal of trees on public property. We brought it before council. We were asked to take it back and kind of rework parts of it. We brought it back again. That program was denied. And there was some discussion amongst council members that we should be taking care of the dead trees on city property before we come up with a program that assists private property owners with removal of their trees. And so that's what we are doing now. This is not a program that's helping out with the removal of private trees. All the trees that are being removed are on city-owned property, on rights-of-way, the same as we're removing hazardous trees within the parks. This is an area that, according to ordinance, the abutting property owner is responsible for the maintenance of the grass in that area of right-of-way between the curb and sidewalk, as well as trees and shrubs and anything else that may be in there. And we've had great success throughout the community with homeowners taking care of that area. But when we're faced with an issue of so many of these dead trees that first started becoming damaged actually back with Winter Storm Atlas, and are now 3 years later needing to be removed before they become a public safety hazard. That's why we went and decided to continue our tree removal program on city property. And when all of those hazardous trees on city property are taken care of, we will come back to you with a program that will try to assist homeowners with removal of dead trees on private property.
So, Mr. Beegler, I just want to make sure I understand. If a homeowner plants a tree in the right-of-way, the city's going to assume the maintenance of that particular tree?
If a homeowner to plant a tree in the right-of-way has to come to the city first to get the approval to plant a tree, so that they're not planting something that would interfere with below-ground infrastructure or above-ground power lines and that sort of thing. So while the tree is growing, the homeowner would be responsible for watering and raking and maintaining that tree. Now that these trees are old and falling apart, actually about 90% of these trees are Siberian elm that were damaged heavily back in 13. We are taking it upon ourselves to have that potential liability removed.
Is there, I guess it would be my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have homeowners planting trees in the right-of-way, and I understand we have issues with dead trees, I've seen them in my own neighborhood in the right-of-way, are we not going through code enforcement first?
We are. Code enforcement is working with us, and code enforcement, since we started doing this removal, obviously about a month or so ago, when code enforcement sees a tree within the right-of-way that is in violation of the code, they're contacting us, and we are putting it on that list of trees to be removed.
Well, what I'm saying is if the homeowner is not being informed that they need to rectify the situation, is that what you're saying?
Not on these street trees, not the right-of-way trees. On trees on their private property, yes, they are.
Okay, because I guess I have an issue with that because homeowners who choose to plant trees in the right-of-way, in my opinion, need to take care of that tree. If they don't apply for a permit to plant that tree, which probably, I don't know what percentage, I would say a great number do not get the okay from the city to plant that tree, that we would first hold them liable to rectify that code enforcement issue. Do you disagree with that?
Well, somewhat. A homeowner that's planting a tree today or this week, that tree's not going to be a public safety issue for 10 or 20 years.
Shouldn't be, I agree.
And may or may not even be the same owner that's there that planted it at that time. I think the city has, there's a shared liability with those trees in that area. If something happens, the homeowner and the city will share the liability for any sort of injury or property damage.
So when you say share, I assume that we've done some removals already, correct?
We have, yes. And oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So is there when you say shared liability, are they paying a percentage, or are we?
No, what I'm saying is that if there's an event where one of these trees were to fall, or a limb fall onto the sidewalk or into the road and create property damage or, God forbid, damage to a resident or someone walking by there, the homeowner is not going to be the one that's solely liable for that damage. The city will still be partially liable for that since the tree is on city property.
Thank you. And I have a question for the city attorney, if I may, please. Absolutely. Carla, on this particular, you're hearing the conversation. My question to you is, in the scenario, and I think that probably happens often, we have a homeowner who plants trees. They're very young. There's not an issue with them. They grow to be 20, 30 feet, 40 feet or more in the right-of-way. We have a new homeowner, maybe even two homeowners later, 3 or 4 homeowners later. What is the situation with requiring, from a legal standpoint, requiring that homeowner to maintenance that particular tree that they may not have actually planted because the city's not planting those trees? So maybe it's something we need to look at, but I think we need to have a better program than what we're doing right now, because the general fund is bearing the brunt, I think, of what we're doing right now. And I don't think we have a lot of room in the general fund for that type of thing. But so my question to you is, maybe you need more time and more information to look through this, but 2 and 3 owners later, what are we looking at from a liability standpoint where the city says, homeowner, you need to take care of this. This is your problem. You bought this home and everything that goes with it.
Well, in our city ordinances, we kind of have two, address the two levels of responsibility. We say the homeowners are responsible up to the street, and we also say that the city can come in and take care of the trees that are in the right-of-way. And I think that reflects that there is joint liability or joint responsibilities for these trees. And if it comes to a situation where there's a tree that damages some property or some person, it really will be dependent on the circumstances of if we knew about the tree being damaged, who was responsible, kind of, it'll be fact specific on that specific tree, but I agree with what's been said that the city has some, has an interest in making sure that trees are safe and that unsafe trees are removed.
So when it comes down to whether we change or come up with a new program, I guess it might be important to understand is if we decide that the path or the new process should be that we notify the homeowner first to rectify the situation, is there some sort of percentage we're going to have to think about and have prepared for a particular new program or process that says the city's responsible for 30% and the homeowner's responsible for 70%? Is that something we need to think about from a legal standpoint? Because now we're talking about rectifying it before it becomes a liability, causes some damage from falling on some other individual's property or themselves or some other citizen walking by. So that's my question is, do we need to think about that and have that? Because I think we're going to end up going in the direction where we need to be able to have the homeowner who planted it rectify that particular issue, at least in my mind, rectify the problem with the tree since they planted it, and what that percentage may end up being as far as just rectifying it, to come out and trim branches off of it, which might be, say, $500. Is there a percentage where we're going to have to say this is the city's and this is the property owners?
I guess that is an option. That is an option, I guess, that we could look at. I guess I'd be a little bit concerned if we're aware of a tree that is potentially unsafe that's in the right-of-way, communicating with the homeowner and waiting for them to fix it and waiting for them to pay a share of it might not be the best idea. But I think that your proposal for splitting costs on a plan is something that could be addressed.
Okay, because that's my concern is that we're trying to take care of it before it becomes a different kind of liability, and I don't doubt that we'll have homeowners who will say, hey, I didn't plant that. That was planted, I don't know how many homeowners before. So I'm just wondering if we're going to run into a challenge right away if we try to say, well, you bought the home, it's 100% your problem. It came with the home that you purchased, and that we're going to maybe have to anticipate that as we try to formulate some new process moving forward. So I thank you for your input. I yield.
Thank you, Alderman Lorente. Alderman Wright, you have the floor.
Well, I'll set the record straight on this one. I'm upset about this, so you know. And bottom line was we talked about this twice, and the decision recommendation of the council was we're talking about dead trees, not bug trees, not fire trees. We're talking about dead trees or damaged trees. And my understanding from our discussions was that before we would proceed with the program, that we would come back to council for discussion and approval of direction. That was my understanding. That's one reason I'm upset. The other thing is, I've been around a long time, and I do not remember the city assuming responsibility of trees in the right-of-way, in the parkway segment. So we're starting to set a policy that's not in concurrence with the past policy that's been going on for decades. So I think if we're going to implement a new policy, we absolutely need to talk about it at this level here so we are all square and clean, and you're clean, and also the fact that you got the money to do it and the backing. But it's very complicated. That's why it didn't fly through last summer. Mm-hmm. The other thing is the funding. I may be wrong, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect the money's coming from the bug tree wildland funding that we gave you?
It's from the urban forestry budget that we have.
Okay, so that money was dedicated through action by the council to address the pine beetle issue and to support the fire department on their interwildland fire program. And I think it was not there to begin a citywide dead tree removal program. I think you might have gotten it from the council with discussion, and maybe you can if you come back, but I want this thing stopped and cease and desist until we get this straightened out. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Wright. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I see Trevor's here with us today. May I ask him a question?
Yes.
Thank you. Trevor, I see you're sitting in today. Are you sitting in response to this item, or was there a specific item you were sitting in to the meeting today?
No, I'm just covering Jeff as he's out of the office.
Okay, well then I do have what I hope is a relatively simple question. I know some of the discussion this meeting on this topic involved the responsibility or liability of the city. Do you know of any incidents where we have had any property damage, like cars or anything else, that the city did have to cover? Because when I looked at this, I thought that all of the liability for those trees in the right-of-ways did fall to the homeowner.
To maintain the trees in the right-of-way is the responsibility of the homeowner, is the way I believe it states in the ordinance. I'm not aware of any liability where we've had injuries or property damage from a tree in a right-of-way. I wasn't here when we had Winter Storm Atlas, so I'm not sure if any branches fell on trees in the roadway next to that right-of-way. As Carla mentioned, it comes down to a fact basis, whether or not we knew about the tree's condition and whether we were negligent in removal of that tree. The shared responsibility that she mentioned, if we know about the tree's condition and it is in a poor condition, and there might be some shared responsibility should it injure somebody. But code enforcement will usually send out a note saying we found the tree in poor condition. You have a certain period of time to remove it. And if they don't, my understanding is we've hired tree companies to come and remove that tree, and then we basically charge them back for it.
Well, thank you, Trevor, because that was my understanding, so that was going to be my follow-up question, and I don't know if Mr. Bigler wants to handle it or Carla, but basically what you just said was my understanding. Whether the tree's in a right-of-way or whether the tree is on private property, if code enforcement sends notification to the homeowner, it is up to the homeowner to take care of that, or, as Barb Garcia, bless her heart, she's not here today, we do not have a hardcore code enforcement. Our citizens can contact code enforcement and make arrangements if they need a little bit more time to handle it or anything else. But the thing is to get the issue taken care of by the homeowner so that they don't have to incur those additional costs. Because if it is not taken care of by the homeowner, then the city will hire someone to do it and put an administration fee on top of it. And if the homeowner does not pay that bill, it actually goes against their property tax record as a special assessment. Do I understand that process correctly?
Correct.
Okay. And so, and thank you, Mr. Bigler. I thought I heard you say that code enforcement wasn't notifying property owners when the trees were in the right-of-way.
They haven't been recently, no. Since we started removing the trees in the city right-of-way, they've just been working with our urban forester to identify those trees that need to be taken care of.
So recently, taxpayer money out of the general fund has been used to remove trees when the homeowner wasn't notified that it was their responsibility?
Well, it is, as the ordinance states, there is a bit of a gray area in the ordinance regarding maintenance responsibility versus removal. And in my mind, the responsibility for maintenance falls to the homeowner. But when it becomes a dead tree that is in danger of potential danger of falling, it's something that the city should be taking care of. It's on city property, same as if it was in a park or around a city building.
Thank you. I'll have to think more on this. Where I stand is I agree. If we have a tree that is going to endanger property or health and safety of people, it needs to be taken care of. I'm not necessarily sure I'm in agreement that it's not the responsibility of the property owner. But thank you for the answers and the discussion today.
Thank you, Alderwoman Scott. Alderman Laurenti, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the city attorney, please. I'd like to make the motion, but I don't want to make a motion that's out of order. Carla, the current process is to notify, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in this particular staff on this. The current process outside of this tree removal, this RFP, the process prior to that, and the process that the council understands, is that any tree in the right-of-way or on private property that's a danger or violates code, goes to code enforcement. Code enforcement notifies the homeowner. The homeowner is responsible to rectify the situation. What kind of motion do we need to ensure that, correct, and my colleagues can chime in here, but because we're going to need a motion or at least a resolution, I would guess, or maybe not. That's my question to you. What do we need to do to make sure that that process, which we understand, is what is executed until we have some new process? What do we need to do? I have something here from Parks and Rec about an RFP, which I don't think the council at this point supports, because we were hoping something was coming back to staff. So what do we need to do at this point to make sure that the process prior to wanting to do homeowners' trees in the right-of-way is followed until something new from council is approved?
I'm afraid I can't speak to whether or not that is always the process that has been followed in the past. I'm not sure which staff person would have that information. We do have an ordinance that says that the city is able to remove, maintain, plant, and prune trees in the right-of-way, and so there is that independent authorization for us to go in and do that. In addition to the process that you discussed related to abatement of dead and diseased trees. But I think you could make in terms of how you would make the motion to restrict expenditure of funds on removing dead or diseased trees outside of the assessment process, I guess that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Alderman Laurenti. Alderman Wright, you have the floor.
I'll make a motion we cease and desist with this operation until we get it straightened out. I'd like to retain the floor.
Go ahead, Mr. Wright.
I think another word of caution to everybody on this board and the audience, probably. I worked for the railroad and the Army and my own company and the city, and one caution that I always got from everybody I ever was around was never publicly admit liability. Good advice? Thank you. Never publicly admit liability.
Thank you, Alderman Wright. We have no one else to speak on this item, and I am going to hold back until Monday night, because I'm sure there'll be more discussion on the city council. So we have a motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Approved. Item number 15, discussion on revised 2016 City Council mission and vision statement. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the history of why this mission and vision statement is coming before the Legal and Finance Committee meeting is attached. Basically, the city councils in the past have went ahead and approved and tried to use it as a team building exercise to streamline our thought process as far as the city council as what we see our vision and our mission and then the goals that we want to set. And so a small group, a retreat was done, and there was a great discussion, and this was the product that came out of that meeting. There was a lot of great input from Alderwoman Modrick and Alderman Solomon. They did a really great job. Alderman Wright also participated. There was a lot of input from everyone, and it was a great discussion as far as what we should be looking at. Basically, the culmination of this is they wanted to keep it very short. They wanted for it to be memorable, and they wanted it to align with our comprehensive plan. And so the goals or the values were basically used, and they've been taken directly out of our comprehensive plan, and this is a tool that the City Council can use to remind each of us that when we're trying to make decisions for ordinances or resolutions or making decisions on any issue that comes before us, is that it is our responsibility as well as city staff's responsibility to always go back and review and make sure it's in alignment with the comprehensive plan. The citizens of Rapid City had a lot of input in that, and we need to not forget that those are the values that we should be making our decisions on. So I just wanted to kind of give that little brief history. It's very simple, it's very short, and I would recommend my peers to go ahead and comment on it. I am in support of this. I think it's very elegantly stated, and it is very memorable, and I appreciate the work that all the council members who attended the retreat put into this, as well as those council members that couldn't make it. I know that they've reviewed it, and they've also provided input. So this was a full council piece of work. And before Alderman Laurenti rings in, I will go ahead and thank him. He today used his spell checker ability and recognized that I do believe we do have a misspelling in this. The last line of our values should be responsive, accessible, not accessible, although as Alderman Laurenti told me, probably we should be assessed for everything we do. So I would recommend that when a motion is made to correct that, and thank you, Alderman Laurenti, for doing that. I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Alderwoman Scott. Alderman Laurenti, you have the floor.
Well, and I've been involved in mission statements before with private corporations, so I just want the public to understand that when they read it, I mean, because honestly, when you look at a mission statement, they're very broad, they're very, very general. And maybe there's still some changes we can make before we have a final, but I would hope that we would, and I'm not saying they're in order of priority, but I think it would look good for us to have something about infrastructure and public safety higher on the list, just because people look at lists and the first ones they see are the ones that they think are the highest priority. Sometimes they don't read past the first couple, 3 lines. So I would suggest that maybe we move up and maybe have some different wording. And I was one of those people that was gone. I was in Kansas City, but when they did this, but there's still some changes I think we can make beyond the accessible and accessible with an AC. But overall, it's very good. I just want the public to understand that mission statements are like this. They are very broad. They are a reflection of a very high-level priorities for the council, and I just want them to understand that when they read this, and maybe there's some other changes we're going to make before we have it finalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Laurenti. Alderman Wright, you have the floor.
Make a motion, this goes to council without recommendation. Second. I support it totally.
Thank you. Alderwoman Modrick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to align where those 7 core values are, that's how it is in order of our comprehensive plan. So it was bringing line item by line item, and then it's really easy this way. So if the council needs to reflect on the core values, it's within the first couple of pages of the comprehensive plan, and you can go right to that area. And then from there, it really goes into some in-depth off of just the line items. Those are like the headings to what really goes and defines each item. So that order wasn't for the public to see that an order was out of balance. It's actually for the council to always remember that our 7 core values are what we as a city are following on virtually everything that we do, and it really makes it easy when you're going to your comprehensive plan to bring those items up based on each 7 core values. And I'm glad that there was just one typo. And I think as well, just to add this, that the council was looking, this is our council document, so I know that everybody is looking for anything that you might see you want to add it in there, and that can circle before Monday, because it's our document, and so it's important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. And we have a motion on the floor. Oh, Mr. Laurenti's back. You have the floor.
I just want to clarify, because it's kind of a, not to nitpick your words, Alderwoman Modrick, but for me, it's one of my core values as an elected official, and I believe this about all government officials and all government entities, that everything we do is for the public. So this vision and these values are a reflection of the fact that we've been elected by people who expect us to do things in certain order. And I think if you put these 7 values out there, one, they might have a hard time figuring out which one is a reflection of infrastructure and public safety, but I can guarantee you that would be at the top, 3 to 1, at least 2 to 1 in a vote. So I just want to make sure that I understand we have the comprehensive plan, but this is our, as you just said, this is our mission statement and our values as a council. So I want to make sure that we, I want to weigh in a little bit more than I have. So I will provide some information and some suggestions, and then we can hash it out by Monday night. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alderwoman Modrick, you have the floor again.
Yeah, just to work on the discussion that we're having, because that's what this is for. It does state in there, identified in the city's comprehensive plan, and we have that comprehensive plan on the first button when you go into the rcgov.org. So it also makes it easy for the public to follow, because if they are looking at the items, the 7 core values, and they see the comprehensive plan, that it's following that identification, then when they do push that button on page 1 of our link, rcgov.org, then they're going to be able to go right into the details of the core values. So maybe that line item that you see under the values and the way we've stated it, maybe you're thinking it might need to have a little more direction in it for the public when they see this. But I encourage anybody in the city of Rapid City to go into the comprehensive plan, because that detail is a line for the entire community. It's not just the city book of values, but it's our entire community's book of values, and many were responsible for doing that. But that's all it is. It's just following the items of the core values, and then it makes it easier even for the citizens to get where they want to go on that comprehensive plan as they're reading it and researching it.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Item 16, second reading and recommendation of ordinance number 6147 regarding supplemental appropriation number 4 for 2016.
Second.
We have no one to speak. We have a motion on the floor to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Do you want to speak? Item 17, introduction and first reading of ordinance number 6148 regarding supplemental appropriation number 5 for 2016. And Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a motion to approve and retain the floor, if I can get a second.
Second.
Thank you. May I ask Tracy a question, please? You may. Tracy, we've talked the budget a lot today. So this is the carryover that was committed in 2015, and now the bills came in 2016, and it wasn't added earlier this year, and so we need to kind of clean up the 2016 budget and get it added. Here's my question. Since we were talking about a cash balance, my understanding, and I want you to correct it if it's wrong, my understanding is that the $913,000 that's coming out of undesignated cash, it's not going to be another deficit off of our cash balance, because this has already been paid. So this is just more of a paperwork cleanup issue of getting the 2015, because the total thing is over $2 million, but it's basically just a paperwork to get our budget straightened out. Is that correct for 2016?
That is correct, yes.
All right. Thank you. Just wanted that clarification to make sure.
Thank you, Alderwoman Scott. We have no one else to speak, so we have a motion on the floor. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. And if I can have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
We have a motion to adjourn. All in favor? All opposed? No one opposes. So we are adjourned. Thank you very much.